Okay. So, じゃあ welcome to our first podcast. じゃあ初めてだから自己紹介。My name is Lee Kai, and I'm here joined by my good friend.
Hello. I'm John.
Nice to meet you, John.
気まず何これ
Nice to meet you. So,
Nice to meet you.
今日は we're gonna do okay, so I guess we're gonna explain our goal for these podcasts first. So first we were thinking about doing some accountability reading, I think, or something like that, and then we wanted to give us the reason to read a book every week, and then we were like, oh, then we can just do a podcast and reflect on the things we read that week, and then also give people that are listening them time to reflect on the message that's written in the books, and then how maybe it can help their day-to-day lives, because I think most of our books we're going to be reading are self-help books, so that will be the direction of this podcast.
Nice.
And also another, I guess, disclaimer, or a warning, is that we're going to be doing these podcasts in kind of mixed English and Japanese, because both of us are most comfortable using both languages to communicate our thoughts. Although for me, most likely it's going to be mainly English, and then choko here and there Japanese. But I think that'll be the structure of our podcast. And yeah, is there anything else you want to add, John?
So content-wise, I think we're gonna go through each chapter and pick up some points that we think were interesting and elaborate on that based on whatever we think about it. We add our opinions along the way.
Yeah. And I think, this is our first time too, so we're not sure exactly, but for this episode at least, it will be like that, what John described. Kana? Okay.
Right.
Now, with that said, our first book that we read this week was Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion by Robert B. Cialdini. Kana?
わかんない Cialdini?
Cialdini? So I think the message of the book, overall, was that there are tricks and little psychological, or sometimes you can even say physiological tricks and cues that he calls compliance practitioners use to exploit some of your tendencies, or not just you, human beings in general. And he had 6 main points, different categories that he explained his argument. で、それがまず it was reciprocation. Second one was commitment and consistency. The third point was social proof. Fourth point is authority. Fifth is liking, and then scarcity. So we'll go one by one in that order. I'm not sure if it's the same order as what was written in the book, but we'll go in the order. And so, yeah, reciprocation. What do you think? Or first of all, I guess we should describe what his message was. And so, if I briefly gonna explain it, it'll be that humans, when we receive something in value, we feel morally obligated to return the favor in some way. And I think I saw and while I was looking at other people's reviews and reflections as well, there was 2 subcategories within that, which was social obligation, which is more kind of the normal thing you would, I think it's a typical なんかやったらまた I have to do なんかやってもらったら自分で you have to do something back. Whereas the second one, which is reject and retreat, I thought was just a little different category, which is where you in the beginning ask for something really ridiculous, but your main goal from the beginning wasn't that ridiculous request, but it's the second request that you're going to ask after that, which is the retreat part. And that's when they feel obligated to say yes to the second request because they rejected the first one, even though they knew it was ridiculous. So それがまあ summary かな、what I got from that chapter. But do you have parts to add, Johnny boy?
That was pretty much it.
Yeah.
And I guess this applies to all the other ones that we're going to talk about, but it makes me critical about such offers. It makes me think some offers are like ill-willed, even though they may be genuine. So it's a difficult topic to, I guess, digest, or concept to digest. But yeah, being aware of this is really helpful.
I think I also read somewhere that like people can still like use or perceive, so they can use these tactics while still believing that they're being ethical. And so like using these tricks and being ethical aren't like mutually exclusive, and that's the scary part, because people will genuinely believe that they're giving you something for real, and they like want you to get it, but then like they still have that in a part of their mind. It's like, but this helps me to get in the or get something back from them. And so I think the point here I'm trying to make is that the genuineness, it can still be true and real when the other person is giving something, but that doesn't mean, just because they're genuine doesn't mean they're not trying to trick you.
So
they can genuinely try to trick you. Maybe that's
that's the difficult part.
Yeah,
and it's scary. I think there was an example of a religious group that tried to give flowers as a cue to have people donate to them. And that's an example of people using this tactic in a ethical, quote unquote ethical way.
Yeah.
But yeah. Really
sorry. Go ahead.
Tricky. It's a tricky concept.
Yeah. So some examples, maybe I should have brought it up a little bit earlier, was 10 tips for blogging, or 10 tips for creating your perfect podcast for our matter. And then they'll be like, hey, this is a PDF and we'll email to you now as long as you give us the email. I think that's both like asking for email for their email marketing, but also same time, it's like they're giving you this 10 tips so that on the long run, hopefully you'll buy their course later on. And that's the reciprocation. Yeah. So other examples like Maine, the Costco samples, or in the States, Trader Joe's samples. They have the coffee stuff. But any kind of sample, I think that's also one example. And I think I want to mention these because it's like they're apparent and they're in front of us. They're obvious. Behaviors are like things we see in our life, but then we're not aware that these are kind of some things that, like the author mentioned, like Robert mentioned, they're trying to exploit that reciprocity part, using those stuff. So I was also watching this YouTube video called Science of Persuasion, which I will put the links in the episode notes to give credit to. But he was talking about how like at a diner, when they're done eating and they the server puts the check down or something, if the server gives 1 mint per diner, the tip increases by 3%. If it's 2 mint per diner, then it's 14% increase. And then demo this is already like cool like correlation. But then the third kind of method is like they put 1 mint per person per diner, but the server walks away and then comes back and says, hey, for you nice people, here are more extra mints. And then the tip increases by 23%. So it's like it's not just like what you give to them, but like how you give it to them, and like making them feel special and unique is what like gets people だと思う. And I think it's so true because we're already talking about diners. Like if I go to a restaurant in Japan with like my family members, I think my mom especially is sensitive to service, 日本語で言うとサービス. And then so なんかlike 無料でなんかちょっとオーダーしてちょっと時間かかったから無料で飲み物くれたとかって時あるのね. And she's like, 本当サービスいいねここlike 大好きみたいな. And so I was like, that's like when I think of that, it's hard to not connect those two dots. It might be other factors too, but that's what I thought. But and then I think the solution, like John talked about earlier, is like be aware of these tricks. But I think for this reciprocity type of gestures, I think it's good to think something that if something is too good to be true, then it's like most likely it is. So like that's a common saying we hear with people. But if someone on the street, like this happened to me, random person on the street gave me like a CD of his like album, of his rap album. And then I was like, oh, thank you. ってなって、別にI don't like rap だけど、例えばif you do like rap, it's like, oh, like やった for free, right? But then like afterwards he was like ちょっと話して he's like じゃあ donations ちょうだいみたいな. And so like そこで I think he was trying to, I don't know, he might be using that tactic. Who knows? All of these stories for me, it's like who knows, but it's cool to imagine if they were actually trying to exploit that.
Yeah. And yeah, so one major point that the author writes at the end of the chapter was, in the context of these reciprocation interactions, he says, a favor rightly follows a favor, not a piece of sales strategy. So if something doesn't seem like a favor, or is not a favor to you, for example, like you getting the rap album from a stranger, while you're not interested in rap, it's not a favor to you. So you're not obligated to give them a favor. And I thought this was really helpful of advice to keep in mind, in the context of these triggers or inclinations that we have.
確かに.
Yeah. And I think this eliminates the option of just rejecting everything, because anything can be a sales strategy, because some people can be genuine, like I said earlier. There was an example of an elementary school kid at a school gathering with all the parents and teachers, where she tried to give a flower to one of the parents, but the parent was like, no, I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to get what do you want from me, kind of thing. But she was genuinely just trying to give that parent a flower because she liked him. And this obviously devastated her. So rejecting everything, he says it's a blanket solution to just reject everything, but it doesn't seem appropriate for this reciprocation trigger.
So that was the first part. But so that's a good point, because I always thought I always think of the worst case is a good self-defense for me. Like, so if like this, like just kind of can't reject everything that's offered. And so ジョンが今言った favor じゃなかったらもうちょっと気を使うみたいな. It's kind of a message, right? 気を使うというか. And
it's
I
not
think
a
that's
favor to you, yeah.
that's a good, yeah, metric, metric or lens.
It's a good guide, yeah.
So. So next point, it's the commitment and consistency. Basically, it's about doing one really small thing that kind of makes you have to do something next step or something a little bit bigger, a little bit when time passes, a little bit after that. And so I guess one example is wait, Honi, do you have an example?
Yeah. For example, the communist camp in Korea, Chinese communist camp in Korea, where they kept
Right.
American soldiers.
So
So
that's in the book, right?
Yeah, this was from the
Yeah.
book. But what the communists had the American soldiers do was write a letter, or write an essay, actually, for a contest that they held. And whoever wins can get an extra amount of food, extra amount of water, whatever, that they needed to survive with. And this wasn't really a huge prize because they were already supplied sufficient food and snacks. I mean, yeah, just food and drinks. But the main purpose behind this contest was to overwrite, or like slowly overwrite the intentions or philosophies the American soldiers had towards communism. And to the American soldiers, it wasn't much of a big deal because it was a pretty small thing to them. And by repeating small commitments, it overwrites the identities and intentions of the American soldiers subconsciously. And they were able to get the prisoners to collaborate them more instead of being more hostile in the camp and prison.
Yeah.
So yeah, so even something small. Sorry.
すごいよね. No, すごいよね.
So yeah.
Reminds me
even
of
something small.
sorry. Zoom lag.
Zoom lag.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna summarize that. Even something small, that adds to your identity, or that manipulates, or I don't want to say manipulate. Even small commitments that influence your identity can yield greater results without your freedom of choice. Yeah, there's another example in the book where a group of residents in California were given a survey. I think they were given a survey to beautify their city, and that's something really small because all they had to do was sign something and tick boxes.
Yeah.
And a couple weeks later, a different group of people came to their homes and they asked them whether they can place a pretty big sign that says that promotes safe driving. And what this shows is that even such a small behavior, such as signing a petition to make the city more beautiful, that plants a seed in the residents that they are moral or like ethical people. So, and that grows in the long term to become much bigger, and that triggers them to do something bigger based on their idea of being ethical and moral. So they complied to the request of people putting big signs to promote safe driving, even though objectively that's a bit odd.
Yeah.
So yeah, the small commitments can unintentionally or subconsciously grow into something big that you might think is justifiable, but if you take a step back, it's like, whoa, what am I doing?
Yeah.
It's my lawn. What am I promoting,
Yeah, so just gotta like take a deep breath and be like, is this a sound decision to like make right now? And so I want to take this idea of commitment and consistency and how, so the author argues that if you tell the people around you you're doing something, you're more likely to do something greater, right? That's the main idea in this chapter. That it reminded me of another idea, which is remember reading somewhere that if you tell someone that about your goals, you're less likely to do them. And I think this was kind of, it's not just one person. I feel like it's a kind of 結構 permeated idea. But I did a little bit more research, and then I ended up on this blog by Trello.com, and I'll put that link as well. And then その中の I'm going to read it off the blog. Perhaps the most popular research about goal sharing and motivation is by Peter Gollwitzer of NYU. In 2009, Gollwitzer and his colleagues published research suggesting that the simple act of sharing your goal publicly can make you less likely to do the work to achieve it. And he goes on and talks about these experiments about law students, giving them questionnaire about their commitment to making the most out of their educational opportunities and becoming a lawyer and so on and so forth. Then, towards the end, or this next part of the experiment was the researchers would be like, on the first group, half of the group, they'll be like, they just confirmed it. They circled like their questionnaire and be like, confirm with the law students, hey, you're going to be この頑張るんだねみたいな感じの just that little simple interaction with them was the first group. Second group was just like anonymous questionnaire, so they didn't even know whose answer was who and stuff like that. So these questions, you seem confused, John, but like these are you confused about the questionnaires?
The questionnaire or questioner? It's a sheet
questionnaire.
of paper.
Yeah, it's a sheet of paper. Questionnaire.
And that encourages the law students, or?
Oh, okay. It says, fill out a questionnaire that measured their commitment to making the most of their educational opportunities. And then to read off word by word more, those whose answers indicated a high level of commitment to becoming lawyers were then split into two groups. For the first group, an experimenter looked at each participant's questionnaire and then asked them to confirm that the answer they circled was the one they had intended. The second group, however, dropped their questionnaires into a box and understood their response was anonymous. Then, after that, both groups were given 45 minutes to work on legal cases. The first group, whose answers had been acknowledged, spent less time working on the cases than the second group, whose answers were anonymous. Researchers concluded that when someone notices your identity goal, that social recognition is a reward that may cause you to reduce your efforts. So in this case, the students who stated they were committed to becoming lawyers had already achieved that identity in their mind thanks to the experimenter's acknowledgement of their answers. So if your goal is closely tied to your identity, it might be best to keep it to yourself. This way, premature praise won't fool you into feeling like you've already achieved your aim. So, right. I was kind of like trying to understand how to make sense of these two kind of not bipolar, like opposite end of the spectrum research. Because one's saying that you'll stick to your goals, one's saying you won't stick to your goals. And so my little theory that I came up with just minimal research is that I think perhaps if the goal is what you wanted it to do intrinsically, telling people prematurely will defeat the goal. Demo, if the goal is something you weren't really interested in the first place, it might make you want to follow through, especially if it was requested to begin with. So the difference I saw was that you didn't さっきの John の example を使うと I didn't go out and say I want to put this sign in my front yard saying like I want to make this environmental or something good community, good city sign. I didn't like go out to do that, but someone asked me to do it. And so like I kind of like comply to their request and be like, okay, shit, しょうがない, I have to follow through. でも being a lawyer isn't like no one's asking these students to become a lawyer. Maybe some are, but I'm guessing most of them, at least filling out the questionnaire, are saying they want to do it themselves. And by having, you know, these researchers acknowledge that, they're like, nah, it could also mean, so that's one difference I saw, whether it's intrinsic motivation or not. Another thing was whether I think that's the main thing. The other one doesn't make sense now that I think about it. But yeah, that's what I thought.
Right. I think there was a similar example to what you said in the book, where in an experiment there were two groups that were given a set of questions, and one of them were instructed to write their names, and the others were instructed to stay anonymous. And at the halfway point of the experiment, the participants were informed that some answers were incorrect, or maybe incorrect, I think. Something that would trigger them into potentially changing their answers. But for the people that wrote their names, they were more likely to deny that request, while the people who were anonymous just took advantage of that and quickly changed their answers. So once you write down your name or somewhat state your identity, you're less likely to change your future behaviors. And this can turn out positively or negatively, depends on the situation too. But I think it's important to be aware of what you're trying to commit to, because in many cases you may fall blind into going into a direction that you don't want to be in. So that's scary.
Yeah, it's a difficult, definitely. No, I guess it can go
both ways.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to assess and be like careful about it.
Yeah. But yeah, another thing that reminded me is sort of my opinion based on what you said about the research by Goldwitzer. You said that if the goal is intrinsic and telling people prematurely will defeat the goal, and if the goal is something that you're not really interested in, it might make you want to follow through. That made me think maybe saying your goals or announcing your goals for things that you feel like lazy or lack motivation with. So like pretty much accountability tasks, tasks that require accountability, I think might be a good place to use this trigger.
That's true.
Yeah. And I think that ties into the next segment, but of social proof, where social forces can encourage or discourage behavior. But if there's anything else that you want to say about this segment, we can do that first.
Covered most of it. So we can move on to social proof.
Cool.
So social proof is the next chapter. And to talk a little bit about it, it's just that when our tendency for humans to, when we are uncertain about some particular situations, we look to others to decide how to act. And so it's pretty kind of self-explanatory, but for example, like reviews on Amazon, like I think that's a good example, because we don't know when we were going to buy this book Influence, we looked at the reviews, checked what were the most helpful reviews, and we used that to base our judgment on. And I think those reviews were really good, so we were more keen to check this out. So that's one example. Another one in the book was actually door-to-door salesmen or women use neighbors' names. So when they go up to a neighbor, they say, hey, this neighbor on next to you, left to you, right to you, John or Lee Kai really recommended this product, and so we would like to invite you to kind of test it out, trial run, so on and so forth. But by using your neighbor's name as a social proof on this victim, to judge the product based on our social proof. So those are the quick examples. But did you have a particular example you wanted to bring up?
One major example the author brought up in this book was a homicide that was made in, a homicide that happened in New York of this mid-20-year-old lady called Catherine Genovese. She was murdered at night in the middle of an apartment complex with 25 or 35 apparent
bystanders, like families?
Bystanders or like なんていうの証拠人?
なんかね witnesses?
Witnesses, yeah. Like around 20 to 30 witnesses. But nobody called the police on it because everybody fell prone to the effects of social proofing or scapegoating, social loofing.
I'm not sure what that is.
Social loafing. No.
Loafing.
So social loafing, where people rely or assume that other people will do a certain behavior because there are so many people in that same place.
Okay.
And I think he uses the term なんだっけ? Pluralistic ignorance.
Yeah.
To describe this phenomena. But like I said, it can be social loafing, social
loafing,
scapegoating or whatever.
Yeah.
It's pretty much the same phenomena where people tend to be not lazy, but they judge their basement off of, as Likai said, on others' behavior because it was such an uncertain situation and they didn't know what to do. And that brings me to another similar example of a car crash. So a car crash happened on a highway, but nobody was stopping to call the police or ambulance. But as soon as the driver got out and started calling for help, more and more started to stop and assist or support that 事故現場. And the reason why they were...
This was the author's accident?
Oh, was it the author?
I feel... Okay, if I'm not mistaken, yeah.
It might have been his friends. ちょっとそこら辺 It's like... It's all mixed up. Like, all these analogies or anecdotes are like really mixed up between his personal life and his interviews. So
he could be bullshitting too, and he can say, okay, no, that's rude. Sorry, sorry, Robert. I don't mean it.
Yeah, and there was another example of, they did an experiment where they had a group of 5 people versus a group of 1 person to see whether they would call an ambulance on a potential from a man potentially suffering from epilepsy. And it turned out that more than 90% of the participants called the ambulance if they were alone, and only 30% called the ambulance if they were in a group of more than 3 people. So that by itself is a bit scary. People tend to rely on others to do certain tasks, and rely on others to base their judgment for their own actions.
And I think I want to emphasize that this pluralistic ignorance is more prominent in situations where like everyone is uncertain of what the situation is. And so if you go back to like the was it Catherine's homicide incident, it's the uncertainty that makes everyone so I'm talking about the witnesses act more normally. And it's weird because in uncertain and public, especially uncertain and public situations, people tend to look cool or like look normal and act like everything is okay, unless it's like obviously not okay. So because of that, everyone then like perceives each other as normal, and they start to act normally themselves. And then so it's kind of like this positive feedback loop where it's like, because everyone's normal, you feel normal. Because you feel normal, everyone else starts to feel more normal too. And then so because of that, no one called the police. And then unfortunately the woman was assaulted and murdered. And so the solution that I think the author mentioned was that you have to pick out a person from the group of witnesses and assign that person to do whatever task, whether that's calling 911 or getting the fire extinguisher or whatever, some emergency task. But picking out a person drastically improves the situation or the likelihood that they will help you. I guess pluralistic ignorance is just like a subsection of social proof, and I think social proof can really apply to a lot of different. It's kind of like that nantaka bias, confirmation bias, not confirmation but conformation bias.
Conform.
Confirmation. と
Conformation. Yeah.
Confirmation 似てるよね。似てる。同じなのか分かんないけど。
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like social loafing and
yeah,
pluralistic ignorance. I think they can overlap.
And
どうぞ。
どうぞ。
じゃあ行かせてもらいます。
はい、どうぞ。
One example that I really liked. Unless, wait, are we done talking about pluralistic ignorance?
I was gonna go kind of more like the general social proofing part. Just small examples, like.
Okay, you can say those first then.
Just other examples of social proof is like donations. I remember at our high school, Christmas concert, they would have these baskets or bags or like a hat, and you pass it. So our concert had like just like any kind of concert, rows of seats for our parents and audience to sit on, and there would be these, I guess, staff members would come by each row and 配るっていうかこうやって渡すよね、このカゴとわかんないバスケットみたいな。And then we pass it along the row and people kind of donate, put in some money, and then pass it on to the next person. And I thought that was kind of like, it's not necessarily social proof because it's like, it's not, we're uncertain, like we can totally make a decision to donate or not, but still that like プレッシャーかなこれはちょっと違うかもしれないけど、ちょっとプレッシャー social pressure to like do the same thing, and also sometimes like people have money already inside the basket too, like when they start off, and I'm like, yeah, これ it just came to us, man, how does this have money in it? But yeah,
that came out as an example in the book too, of leaving a tip.
Tip, yeah.
Or that donation basket too, like during.
That too.
Yep. They would, so whoever's hosting that donation would put a couple of dollars prior to passing it out to promote social proofing, to utilize social proofing so that it creates somewhat of a, not an urgency, but like a standard, a social standard, so that other people can comply to. So yeah, it's exactly what you just explained.
And just two more examples is I see flyers and ads, or I think more in the States, of on bulletin boards, like not blackboards, like bulletin boards, and with like the slips at the bottom, there's like number and like maybe some like a contact information, email. There's this little like a taco みたいな足になっちゃうね. So it's a paper with all the information at the bottom. It's like different legs of slips of information. And I think it was my brother or someone was like, yeah, これ one of them is always off or like taken off because it shows that it's like popular or something. And then I'm like, oh, that makes sense if people actually do that. So I thought that reminded me of that. And also he talked about canned laughter, right? Like laughing tracks in the book. Wait, did it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So the author was saying canned laughter causes viewers to laugh longer and more often, even though, so it's actually more effective in poor jokes or like really boring jokes. And that reminded me of, I was watching NBA Warriors game the other day, and I realized that there's no audience, right, because of COVID-19, but you can still hear like the cheers, and it felt like weird, right? Because it's like, well, there's no one there, but why do we hear it? And so I think they also acknowledge and understand the importance of just the crowd and the cheers, even though we all know that there are no audience there. So I thought that was cool to see.
Yeah. So they were, just like the television people, they used social proofing to their advantage.
Yeah.
Instead of being a victim to it.
Yeah.
Based on the prior examples. Right. I have another example of social proofing being constructive to people. And it's an example of, I think it was his own son, in the swimming pool. He really wanted his son to be able to swim, but he was really afraid. And he didn't want him to drown in case he like jumped into the pool with his friends or whatever. To avoid these accidents, he wanted his son to learn how to swim. So he hired a university student to teach his son how to swim. But his son still didn't enjoy the experience, and he didn't improve his swimming skills. But one day, at his regular school, him and his class went to a swimming pool. And there, his friends and himself swam together. And ever since, after seeing his other friends swim, he started to enjoy swimming. And he actually wanted to swim more. And after hearing that, and back at home, the father actually saw his son swimming in the swimming pool. And he was so happy that he took off his shoes and just jumped into the pool and like was like, "Whoa, you learned how to swim? Why you swimming, man? Like I'm proud of you," kind of thing. And he soon realized that it was because his son saw his classmates who was around the same age as him. That acted as a positive social proof for him to be encouraged that he can swim. The main point was the son seeing another student around the same age as him swimming, and that encouraged him to swim as well and feel less scared of just swimming. So this was another example of a positive social proofing.
Reminds me of one of our previous conversations about Dr. K's point of or his story about Alcoholics Anonymous, story where people that went through the struggles of alcoholism and addiction process, after they overcome addiction, they go back to Alcoholics Anonymous to then help other addicted people go overcome, right? And those are much more those people that overcame addiction are much more effective in helping other addicts overcome theirs, because it's that his point of view is more like they understand the struggle more and the road to overcoming, and so it's easier and to relatable and so on and so forth. But it just reminds me of that, because the boy was also like looking at this kid, and he was like, oh, he's the same as me, and I'm like, he can do it, then why can't I do it? That's such a powerful, like a mirroring another person and then looking at yourself is such a powerful tool. But also I think it's also could be dangerous too, because if you boil it down, you can generalize it to comparing yourself to other people, because that's what they're all doing, right? They're comparing the addict, alcoholics, is comparing himself or herself to this person that overcame the addiction. and it can go, oh, I can do it, which is the more healthy, positive way. But it can also be, wow, they already overcame. I can't do it. I'm gonna go. I'm the worst. I'm blah blah blah. So it's really slim, like a line between good or bad, and so it's important to keep that in mind to see which way you're leaning towards. When you're comparing. Oh.
Do you wanna explain who Dr. K is?
Yes. So Dr. K is just God. He's our role model, and he's a psychologist or psychiatrist, who also streams on Twitch. He does counseling with mainly Twitch. The videos he posts are mainly with Twitch streamers. He goes through their problems, and kind of walks it through it, and he's just an amazing like conversationalist that can really dissect what's happening in your life and walk you through it. And I think we both look up to him a lot. So a lot of times our conversations are based on what he tells us, explains to us, and so this was just one of them. Did I miss anything else?
So the reason why Dr. K is really inspiring to us and relatable to us is because he loves to game as well, and he used to be so addicted to gaming that he almost failed university, and he barely managed to graduate, and he was in his depths, as he describes, for around a couple of years. And then he decides to go become a monk. And there he experiences a lot and decides to come back to the academic world and become a psychiatrist at Harvard. So he went through med school and at Harvard, so he made this amazing comeback.
I don't think he went to med school at Harvard, but he's a
really?
faculty at Harvard. He went to Tufts University for med school. And he was a clinical fellow at Harvard Medical School.
なるほど. Okay.
But nonetheless, he went through, I think a lot of so-called like gamers go through, and is that a lot of times we do get addicted to gaming, and we lose control of our lives sometimes, of like, because we focus so much on gaming. But I think he went through that, he overcame it, and he's trying to help other people, so it makes it even more meaningful. And for us to, like, going back to liking, or our liking topic here, we relate to him more. We feel like he understands us more, so that the words that come out of his mouth is more impactful. Kana?
I guess conclusion for social proofing. まだ言ってなかったっけ?
まあ
Yeah.
Well, simply recognize.
全部 copy paste that.
Yeah. Yeah, 本当なんだろう. Using your surroundings, environment to judge is useful. It could be useful, but I don't think you don't have to necessarily overuse it. If you're in an emergency, the fire is burning, or if there's fire burning in your apartment or your building, yeah, a lot of times you just follow where それもちょっと微妙だな. Like just think for yourself. I think that's like the best solution.
どうなんだろうね. I guess, yeah, a part of it is thinking for yourself.
Yeah.
But I feel like people that can think for themselves are still prone to this phenomena because of the social pressure. So what I got out of this was you should be the one initiating, because even if you're wrong, that's a short-term embarrassment versus a potential life being saved. I guess when you're put in situations like this, when you're uncertain of what to do, you should weigh the potential risks that would happen if
Mm.
you don't initiate versus if you initiate,
Yeah.
and base your judgments off of that, off of your own individual scale, instead of the social ambience of
Yeah.
uncertainty.
Yeah. Like you said, short-term embarrassment of like over exaggerating the situation, saying this is an emergency when it's not, is better, far better than this is saying it's not an emergency but it actually is.
Mm.
So, particularly in that homicide incident, but I guess applies to anything, right?
Mm.
Earthquakes too, like in Japan. I think that's pretty big. Like a lot of times everyone's uncertain if this is a huge earthquake, and for us it was like that when we Toku no shinsai no toki toka mo, the 311. It was like we're all like, I remember my classmates were like, oh, it's just another earthquake, and like yeah, everyone thinks that because it's so common in Japan. And I remember someone was still feeling okay, or like not taking it seriously, even though it was like literally shaking the building. So like don't assess based on maybe like past experiences or people around you, but like actually look at the situation. Like Elon likes to say about the first principle, like is the building shaking? Yes, it is. Is it shaking a lot? Yes, it is. You should do something instead of looking around and analyzing by analogy is what he compares the counterpart of first principle or something. So, and I think it just goes back to my original message of think for yourself. And by no, John, you're saying for those people that tend not to think for themselves. I don't know. I feel like everyone can if they put in the time. I don't know.
まあ実際に or maybe just that we're kind of off.
Maybe
like it's a we tend not to be prone to this as much, but we can't really say because we weren't ever put into such situations. So
yeah. So that's so true because 波の反対方向に行く方が好きっていうか I tend to do that, or like even though people call me a bandwagoner for liking the Warriors, I genuinely love Steph Curry and the Warriors for who they are and not for their championships, although those are great. I love their play style and stuff, so that is my reason, and not because everyone loves them. But for other parts of my life, yeah. Were you gonna say something?
Great segue. I was just about to so yeah, I guess that wraps up the social proof section then.
Okay.
Authority is chapter 6, but we're gonna talk about it before other chapters.
Let's do it. So then,
cool.
authority is self-explanatory, kind of, in a way that when you perceive someone as with more authority, like a parking lot guard, or like a captain, like at the airplane flight captain, pilot. There you go.
Captain.
With the uniform, especially, it's pretty convincing if they walk up to you and be like, I'm a captain. So そういう感じかな authority は some examples are like you tend to one example, good one, is so there's an experiment where doctors authorize nurses to administer lethal doses of medications to specific patients as an experiment, and be like lethal doses だから本当に危ないんだけど 95% of those nurses complied, and so these other researchers had to stop these nurses just right before they injected or prescribed. So that they go on autopilot once they get commands from these authoritative figures or people. And so that's another tool that these compliance practitioners exploit to say, hey, they give you like really excessive titles, like I'm a senior なんとか sales or director of なんとか and these are products って言って、そんな感じで、魅力するyeah, like そんな感じで they try to lure you into their sales. So we should be careful about that.
I think in that same experiment, it's also important to mention how the orders were given through a phone call instead of the actual person being there. And it was that simple simple information of the person on the other side of the phone saying that he's a doctor that triggered the autopilot mechanism in the nurses that caused them to proceed to give patients fatal doses. So so it really highlights that the power of the authoritative status has in these social contexts.
And I forgot, I don't know if this part was in the book, but like kids are naturally taught in school to listen to the teachers and the staff members of the school administration, and follow them, right? Because it makes sense, they're adults, they know more. So, but as those kids, or as us kids, we grow into adults, like we need to learn to start thinking about like, should I listen to this person? Is this person really an expert? And like, would I like? Not only are they expert, but do they really care for you? Are they on your side? Because they can be experts, but they can still prescribe lethal doses if they want. In that case, so again, we'll go back to our main point. Our main solution is to kind of like to slow down, think for yourself, analyze if you're being rigged.
Or question their credibility before anything.
Yeah.
なんか it really boils down to a simple conclusion.
Or solution, right? You mean like the
solution. まあ I guess we can talk about that later. So 次行きますか。
Nice. So next point is liking, or similarity, breeding liking is maybe a better word to say it. And so similarity breeds liking.
Okay.
And so similarities like attractiveness, similarities, complement, contact, cooperation, and I think conditioning and association. So good examples like commercials, they put on like sometimes athletes for like Gatorades, or some commercials you see athletes use their reputation to raise their reputation for the product. That's a common association, I think, example. And that studies found that we automatically attribute traits such as talent, kindness, honesty, and intelligence to attractive people, which is so, it's so, you can say unfair, but it's so like, yeah, damn, that's some mother nature shit. Cause like,
it's powerful.
They don't care if it's unfair. It's just like, you look
good.
Yeah, it's just what it is, which is so like, like you said, so powerful. The image that comes to my mind of that. And so I have like, I guess, one personal experience example of liking, when a salesman but he was talking to me as I was renting a car, and this receptionist or this representative came out, and he's like, well, just a small talk, and while we were doing all the documents and stuff, he would be like, oh, where are you going? And I'm like, oh, I'm going to Leavenworth, which is like a neat town. I don't know if it's, yeah, neat town towards the east where there's a lot of like beer and like a German town なのかな? But anyway, he's like, I've been there の感じで言ってたし, and he also said like, where are you from? And I'm like, oh, I'm from Japan. He's like, oh, like I went to he went to Gonzaga University, which is also in Washington, and as we all, or not we all know, but there's an NBA player that graduated from there, Rui Hachimura. So he was this representative was in the same at the English class as him, and so they were like group mates, and they talked, and so he brought that up with me, and he's like, you know, for me I was like, oh yeah, that's pretty cool, because like, I mean, he's Japanese, and he had class with them, he plays basketball, I like basketball too, so like all these like so many connections that naturally, I guess in my mind, it's not like I gave him more tip or I gave him added more like services so that he would get more sales, but I saw that liking not exploitation. I don't want to make him put in a bad light, but like that trick was like apparently like present in that situation. So it's fun to reflect back and see that. There's another example. So for the longest time, my uncle, who is a physician, he said he likes to read up about many different topics and music, like cultures and religion and anything you imagine, because it helps him connect with his patients. And I never kind of digested that as much as I did right now after reading the book, because by being able to converse about different topics that the patient is maybe holding very closely to their heart, such as something, if my uncle can talk about it nonstop, it'll be like, wow, he's an amazing physician. They'll feel more cared for and connected, and it just kind of makes sense. So I commend my uncle for focusing on that part, to be able to connect more with people.
There was a example of likability in action with a juvenile being questioned at a police office between two officers. One was labeled the good cop and the other was labeled the bad cop. Okay. And the bad cop was coercive. He would intimidate the kid, saying how long he could go to jail if he lied, if he didn't say anything. He just threatened him throughout the entire interrogation. While the good cop comes in and gives the bad cop a little bit of money so that the bad cop can go outside to buy them coffee. So that the good cop can talk privately to the juvenile one-on-one. And then the good cop goes up to the juvenile kid and says how all he wanted to do was to help the kid, and if he actually told the truth and told them how he actually committed the crime, he can potentially cut his sentence to 2 years from 5 years, and maybe 1 year. And because of how supportive he was, in contrast to the bad cop, the juvenile felt much more safe and much more trusting in the good cop, knowing his intentions, quote unquote. So he actually told the good cop how he confessed, pretty much. And yeah, this is an example of liking in play, but also the principle of contrast in action, where I don't think we touched on this, because this is the very first chapter in the sample. It wasn't really titled. It was like weapons of influence to your chapter. だから we didn't touch on it, but it was pretty much the effect of contrast being more alluring to a victim. So what I mean by that is, so it's similar to the principle of reject and retreat that we talked about in the reciprocation segment. But if you present an expensive price at first, let's say 10万円 to a customer, and then you provide a cheaper product afterwards, they're more likely to purchase the cheaper product because they have the initial 10万円 っていう impression, and 5万円 seems much more cheaper. So that contrast principle is in action in this case. And just like that, it applied to the bad cop and good cop example, where the juvenile or the boy didn't feel comfortable confessing to the bad cop, but once the good cop came into play, he felt more safe complying. But regardless of this scenario, he confessed. The final behavior was confessing. So they use the contrast principle pretty effectively to make the juvenile confess.
Yeah, it's pretty. That's also powerful. You know how they say like people on doing presentations or performances, if you do it right after a very good one, you'll look really bad, even though you're like decent. So same concept, but I think it emphasizes more the power of it. So it's pretty scary, to be honest. I think the solution for this part was like separating your feelings for the requester and from the product or the service you're being sold. Which is harder than doing it than what's it? Harder
Easier said than done.
Easier said than done? Harder said than done. Easier said than done.
Easier said than yeah.
Harder done than said.
Harder done than said. We'll make that our motto for this podcast.
That's so true, yeah. But そんな感じかな? But anything else before we move on?
There was ごめんちょっと一瞬 example 戻るけど a really small example.
Yeah.
In a election in Ohio, there was one attorney who was said to have a low probability of winning, but as soon as he changed his family name to Brown, his probability went up.
Yeah.
Because Brown is a relatable last name in Ohio. So just because he changed his name to a more relatable one, his possibility or chances of winning the election increased.
Yep.
So this is likability again in play.
Yeah.
Which seems absurd if we talk about it like this, but yeah, it worked. It happens.
Yeah, it happens. Yeah. So
the
last chapter is scarcity, which is really short because I only have really a few points to say. Actually, it's like fewer than a few points. But the basic message is the thought of losing something motivates us more than the thought of gaining something of similar value. Ooh. So, common examples are like, oh, Amazon, only one stock left. And airlines, there's only 3 seats left on this flight. If you do e-commerce, Shopify, whatever, you'll have a checkout timer. Or even if you're buying tickets at like for NBA games or something, you'll see like, hey, you have the seat確保されてる for the next 5 minutes, so buy it before then. I think those are kind of playing along with the scarcity part.
I think the scarcity principle really depends on the context and timing because, for example, regarding flight tickets, let's say you really have to go back to your home country for important documents or like something that requires your urgent attention or urgent presence, then in that case, scarcity principle can act as a good motivator for you to behave in certain ways. So it can work towards you, for you, but regardless, I think we should still be aware of what you're dealing with precisely, like how it can benefit you, how it can potentially be a detriment to you.
So
Okay.
ごめんまだどうぞ。
Yeah, so just carefully assessing the situation and not blindly acting based on the scarcity principle by itself.
Yeah. One thing I would like to comment is I think what I'm scared of, or what maybe the author is saying, is that those companies might put in, say, there's only a few stocks left, when in reality there's like 100 more left. And they might even jack the price up just because, just so they can rip you off. And so, in that case, as a user or as a customer, you'd be kind of ripped off and taken advantage of. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so that's an instance where you're basing your actions only on the scarcity principle. But like I said, if there's other urgent forces, like the one that I talked about regarding documentation in different countries and the timing, it's しょうがない or okay to comply to it. But if you're only looking at the one item left in stock to drive your purchase decisions, I think that's a bit iffy, because you're basing your actions on a really short-term gratification.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Gotcha. Yeah. That makes sense.
So yeah, just take multiple things into consideration. So think for yourself.
That's the bottom line of the book. Not to,
割と当たり前なことかもしれないけど、regardless, I do feel like there are points that we should keep in mind, because they can be really undercover or subconscious. So yeah, even though we've been concluding on the same solutions for each chapter, they all hold their importance.
Yeah.
For different situations and scenarios. So we're not trying to say that it's a really 当たり前 and simple book.
Yeah. It makes me think if my understanding was just subpar, if my only conclusion is to be more attentive.
That too.
It's like it might just be on us or me. Like So you guys should still read it.
Please read it. Click on a link in the description below, and we'll get a 5% commission off of that purchase. I'm just kidding. We're not doing any of that yet.
Ooh. Yet. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess.
But yeah. Any last words?
As a final conclusion, let's go over each chapter. So regarding reciprocation, if it's not a favor to you, you shouldn't be obligated to give a favor back to somebody or something or a service.
Sounds good.
It might be difficult because of the social context or pressures that you experience, but keeping that principle in mind, if it's not a favor, you shouldn't give a favor back. Or else it isn't a reciprocation. It's a one-way favor. Reciprocation should be an equal favor given towards reciprocation should be an interaction of equal favors. So if you don't feel like it's a favor, there's no obligation for you to reciprocate it.
Right.
This. For commitment and consistency, I think this one was pretty new to me, or like eye-opening, because we don't really consciously think about these things. Our behaviors, or subtle subconscious or mundane behaviors. And I guess what this segment taught me was be aware of a lot of even the small actions you take, because that can be adding to your motivation behind your behaviors, regardless of your intentions. So yeah, as we talked about in one of the examples, simply signing a simple petition to comply to making the state a more beautiful one can lead to you having a huge sign in your lawn saying, promoting safe driving. So yeah, being aware of the small tasks you do and asking yourself why you're doing a certain task or why you're doing certain things is important. And I also want to add that it's okay to step back even though you committed to something. Because more often than not, you can make better observations and thus decisions if you look at your decisions or behaviors more objectively, instead of committing fully to what you said like 5 years ago or something.
Yeah.
And I feel like currently, especially I think in the Japanese education, where somewhat conditioned not to make a mistake or try to fully commit to what we say or do. But a lot of the times this can lead to people suffering in the long term because maybe that's not what they wanted to do in the present. Maybe they really wanted to do something in the past when they were students, but because they committed back then, the autopilot mode went on, and they kept that as their motivation up to the present, even though they feel somewhat unsatisfied with their life. Not only Japanese education, I just brought that up because I thought it'd be a good segue into that. But yeah, so I guess what I want to say is try to reflect on each of your behaviors every so often, routinely, because before you know it, you might be going into a direction that you might not want to go. So
I think a good example is staying at the same company for a long time. I think once you commit to a company, it's difficult. Not that I know, because I've never worked in a Japanese company, but especially for that long. So, but I don't think moving around, not committing to anything is bad. I mean, it's not good either, but also committing for too long could be bad too. So, balance かな、そこら辺。But yeah, どうぞ。Go on. どうぞ。
Well, yeah, we also kind of touched on how this commitment can be a good motivation for things that you don't want to do, for accountability. For social proofing, I think I said be the initiator, because more often than not, you might be able to save a life. And all you're sacrificing is your social embarrassment. Blah, blah, blah. I think it's important to be aware of whether or not your actions are being influenced by your surroundings.
So that's the main. I think
And
I agree.
having your own scale to judge your behavior on.
Mm-hmm. I think the very fact that you are aware of this, especially the pluralistic ignorance effect, will then help you to act depending on the situation, because we can't prescribe exactly what you should do in every situation. So, ね、そこら辺は自分で。
Authority. This is tricky because I don't think a lot of us have like opportunities to confirm their credibility. Confirm the credibility of a potential authority.
I guess it might be easy now because you can use social media and you can Google search that person's name. And
Sure,
maybe,
yeah.
Because we can. Yeah, I think that's the best you can do.
Okay, じゃあ最後。あ、違う、最後じゃない。liking だね、次は。
Mm.
Do you wanna take a go?
I think the majority of the book context is like sales situation, transactions, and so that's why I had my solution put down as separate your feelings for the requester from the product or service being sold. So in that kind of situation context, everything else other than the product is just fluff and just worried about what the product does. And I think Elon Musk doesn't put I think he claims that he doesn't put any money into marketing, and so you don't really see commercials, but and it's all into R&D and the car itself. So if that's the producer side mindset, right? That's because he's manufacturing all the cars, but I think we can take a little bit from that mindset from him and use it in our case and be like, what's the product giving me, instead of what the person is telling me what it can do. そこがそこの区別できたら一番かな。
So being more aware.
Yeah, I think just being aware of all these different tips or exploitations is just half the battle.
For scarcity, or for the scarcity principle, I think the main takeaway is to not base your judgments only on the scarcity characteristic of a certain product or a certain thing. So yeah, you should base your decisions on multiple facets of urgencies instead of just the scarcity urgency. Because scarcity isn't the only thing that suggests the value of something.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's important to consider other factors that can be valuable to you. Yeah.
Holistic analysis.
Holistic, yes. All right. So the main takeaway from this book was holistic analysis. Yeah. 本当にそうだよね。Not being one dimensional, I guess. Considering different layers of the situation.
And turn off autopilot.
Put your mind into the situation.
Which is harder done than said.
Definitely harder done than said.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're no experts, so
we're just two guys reading a book and reflecting on it.
So take it by a grain of salt, but そんぐらいかな？今回は。
So yeah, think next week we will choose another book for next week and come back with another reflection of episode of reflection. って感じかな? That'll be all for us or for me. John, anything else? Johnny boy?
Thank
you for listening, maybe?
Thank you for listening. Yes.
Thank you guys.
Please, please have a good night.
Or morning.
Feel free to give us feedback because we would appreciate that, because we want to improve this podcast. I don't know if you can call it a podcast. It's a conversation between two guys.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's what podcasts are.
Yeah.
But yeah. Feel free to say hi or whatever. You can leave your voice memos
yeah, you
in
can.
our page through our Anchor page, because that's our main distributor
Yeah.
for the audio.
And we'll be able to play the message on our podcast.
Yeah, so questions とかなんか本当に何でも questions, comments, whatever you have in mind, please feel free to share with us, because we want to make it a better experience for everybody.
I'll ask the first question, John. What's your favorite NBA team?
Oof. I guess you'll find out in the next episode.
Yo, that works.
Yeah,
What a cliffhanger, man. So I think that was the end of our first episode. Thank you everyone for listening. We will continue next week with our next book.
Which is
お楽しみに. Unless we have we can choose later.
yeah, we'll choose.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Thank you guys.